Now, during a previous episode, the Associates for Biblical Research presented Pastor Brian Windle in his presentation of archaeological evidence that concluded that the biblical character Abraham did really exist. And in that episode, I debunked the first half of his so-called proofs. But are the second half of his evidential findings stronger? And will it be enough to convince me that the Genesis fable of Abraham and his family was actually accurate? Now, during the first episode, concerning whether Abraham existed or not, I debunked Pastor Brian Windle's evidence pretty easily, because it wasn't evidence, it was speculation. He named cities, archaeological landmarks, and the giant battle of Siddim, which may or may not have occurred, as it is disputed among scholars whether the event actually happened, as proofs that Abraham existed because these archaeological sites, landmarks, and this battle are mentioned in the book of Genesis. And that was a fallacy. Saying that we have a proof of a city or landmark, and we know that to be true, somehow verifies the existence of a man in a story where these landmarks were mentioned is a fallacy. And historians don't even know if this Battle of Siddim, commonly known as the Battle of Nine Kings, happened partially, or didn't happen at all. And even if it did, it still didn't prove the existence of Abraham. However, the second half of his declared evidence is a little more specific to Abraham's doings in his life, including his death and the death of his family. But we'll see if there's actually really evidence behind this, or is it just mere speculation once again. As Pastor Windle is an evangelist, and an evangelist believes the Bible is infallible and does not accept fact that contradicts that claim. Well, one of his later arguments was, Genesis mentions caravans of camels as Abraham migrated to Canaan. Now, this seems silly at first, but I see where the pastor is going with this, because camels weren't supposedly domesticated in that time period, which was several thousand years BC. And Pastor Windle points to hieroglyphics and various statues from ancient times that do indicate that camels were domesticated at that point, which meant whoever wrote that story in Genesis was correct. Well, first of all, you have to understand that Abraham lived several thousand years BC, and the story of Genesis was constructed, most scholars believe, between 600 and 500 years BC. So one, it is possible whoever constructed the story was referencing his own time period, or two, whoever constructed the story got it wrong, and the character of Abraham and his family migrated without domesticated camels, or three, it's irrelevant because we have no stone cuneiform tablets or any other historiological evidence that Abraham existed to begin with. You're acting like that the story of Genesis proved every other scholar wrong, when the fact is the secular hieroglyphics show that there are probably domesticated camels. So what? That doesn't prove that that man and his family existed who may have used them. Very weak argument. And the next bit of evidence that Pastor Windle uses is the Asiatic Merchants painting. This is a painting that shows migration of peoples between Canaan and Egypt. So the pastor's conclusion is Abraham must have existed because he migrated just like the people portrayed in this painting. And again, just because there's a painting of people migrating between Egypt and Canaan doesn't mean that the specific man you claim exists is proven because of a portrayal of the movements of others. That's like saying someone may discover my journal 1,000 years from now, where I claim to be an Olympic gold medal winner, and then they find old films of the Olympic Games. That doesn't prove that I was an athlete in those games. And then he has the same argument, but a little stronger, with the Moriah tablets. These were 15,000 stone tablets found in the city of Moriah, and in these tablets were letters, literature, treaties, and many other reflections of the culture at the time. And many of these reflections of culture are also noted in the book of Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. Okay, all of these ancient stories probably started off in oral tradition and were actually written down 5 or 6 centuries before Christ. So the stories would have reflected the nuances of the culture at the time. If I write a fictional novel portraying 15th century England, my book is going to be filled with nuances of that time. It doesn't mean my fictional character existed. And these first 3 arguments fall into that fallacy of believing that just because you can say that one thing is true, you automatically conclude that the second thing is true. That's like saying that Jack missed school today and then just concluding that he was on vacation with his family. The fact of Jack missing school is true if you're the principal. The part about him being on vacation with his family is conjecture. And that's exactly what Pastor Windle was doing with these so-called evidential proofs. But the last 2 points that the pastor presents are probably the strongest that he has, and even they really aren't that solid. The first is what he calls the uncovering of Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah was where supposedly Abraham was about ready to execute Isaac under the orders of God as a test for his loyalty. It was also a place where God gave instructions to David and where his son Solomon's temple was supposedly built. Now, this would be very significant because if we have evidence that this is indeed the site and these events happened, that Mount Moriah is very close distance and proximity to where Golgotha is located, the execution site of Christ himself. And this would be significant to me because everything would seem to be in an order of continuity, an absolute connection where God first made his presence known to man, where it all started, and then where it all ended on the cross, which one source said was only 700 meters down the road. That would make me start wondering a bit, that continuity. It wouldn't be concrete proof, probably wouldn't be good enough for Matt Dillahunty, but for me, I would start to think about it a little bit more. But here's the problem. We don't know that that's the real Mount Moriah. The Samaritan Torah has Mount Moriah in a different location on the West Bank. In an Islam tradition, it was Ishmael, Abraham's illegitimate son, who was actually on the chopping block to be sacrificed. And that Quran has that mount listed as Moriah, a site that is close to Kaaba in Mecca, located in Saudi Arabia. So the first problem with Mount Moriah is we don't know if it's that site. The second problem is we have no actual archaeological evidence to prove that Solomon's temple existed anywhere. So now we really don't know whether that's the site. And even if we could show that that was the site mentioned in Genesis, we have no archaeological evidence or proof whatsoever to show that Abraham was there and almost sacrificed Isaac to his God to show loyalty. There is nothing archaeological about this that proves the existence of Abraham, Pastor. Once again, what you have is conjecture. And finally, he presents the tomb of the patriarchs, the place where Abraham and his family was buried. The story in Genesis is that Abraham purchased this area for his family's burial, and that's where his family laid for eternal rest. This is a place of significance for the Muslims as well, because they believe Ishmael is buried there. And according to their faith, Muhammad was a descendant of Ishmael. It is a place of contention, obviously, between the Jews and the Muslims, and an Islamic mosque stands there today. And here's the problem, whether you believe Ishmael, Isaac, Abraham, or any other family members were buried there, we have no proof that any of them were buried there. Again, most scholars think that this site started to become sacred around 600 years BC. They believe this because they have uncovered pottery and shards obtained from the locals there that suggests that indeed it was a site of pilgrimage during that time period. Now, we've recovered no bones from that area, but in fairness, we can't do excavations because of the sensitivity of the place. What we do know is that over one of these caves of burial, a rectangular enclosure was built by Herod the Great, but that was somewhere between 37 and 4 BC. So the very earliest we have of this site being considered holy as a sacred burial place was almost 1400 years after the supposed time of Abraham's existence. So that's it. That was the conclusion of Pastor Windle's presentation on why he has archaeological evidence proving the existence of Abraham. And none of it is proof at all. It isn't even suggestive evidence. What you have, Pastor, is a bunch of fables revolving around landmarks. And it's okay that these guys from the Associates of Biblical Research investigate these items and come up with a theory. What's not okay is when you declare them as evidence, and this is my problem with the fundamentalists. Once again, this is not evidence, and it is not even nearly so. But if this was the best attempt from the Associates of Biblical Research to give evidence for the existence of Abraham, I would say to seriously reflect on the absolute bias of your conclusions. Because if you want to be respected as a scholar, you're going to have to learn the difference between evidence, probable evidence, and pure speculation. But if you'd like to read a work which I admit is fiction, check out my novel The Second Fall, an offbeat apocalypse sure to offend the fundamentalist. On Amazon, see the link in the video description as well as the banner, and I will see you next time when we once again take the sword of reason and reality and thrust it right through the heart of ignorance.